Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. The number of daily new coronavirus cases in the United States has dipped under 60,000 after 10 days with 543 fatalities. Death toll in America has climbed to almost 147,000 with over 4.2 million infected. Brazil has reported 555 more fatalities and over 24,000 new cases, taking the death tally to over 87,000. Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 20 people have died overnight as the tally rose to 5,842 people with more than 274,000 infections. Over 647,000 people have been killed by the virus worldwide, while nearly 16.2 million have been infected. Beijing says the U.S. consulate in China's southwestern city of Chengdu has been formally closed. The U.S. flag on the consulate has been lowered, its plaque removed, and Chinese authorities have taken possession of the premises. Beijing ordered the facility to be shut in retaliation for China being ousted from its consulate in Houston, Texas by Washington. Germany has rejected US President Donald Trump's proposal of inviting Russian President Vladimir Putin back into the G7. Foreign Minister Heiko Maas says Moscow cannot be included in the group unless it actively solves the conflict in Crimea and eastern Ukraine. Trump raised the prospect of invitation last month following Russia's expulsion from the bloc in 2014 when it annexed Crimea. "60 people have been killed and another 60 injured in fresh violence in the West Darfur region of Sudan. UN officials say around 500 armed men attacked Masteri town north of Baida village. Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok says Khartoum will send security forces to Darfur to protect its citizens. And the West Indies are faced with an uphill task of scoring 389 to win the third test when the play resumes today on the fourth day of the match. The Windies will need to really buckle down, especially after losing early wickets last night to Stewart Broad, who got rid of the opener and the night watchman. News in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. We start our news bulletin from the United States, where the number of daily new coronavirus cases has dipped under 60,000 after 10 days with 543 fatalities. The death toll in America has climbed to almost 147,000 with over 4.2 million infected. Brazil has reported 555 more fatalities and over 24,000 new cases, taking the death tally to over 87,000. Over 647,000 people have been killed by the virus worldwide, while nearly 16.2 million have been infected. More in this report.
The second wave of the new coronavirus, after surging in the Americas, Africa and parts of Asia, is now gripping Europe. Healthcare facilities in the US are beyond overwhelmed, with tens of thousands new cases sprouting every day. Mexico and Brazil are no different, with a combined tally of over 30,000 new COVID patients emerging every 24 hours. While Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro continues to defy the need for any restrictive measures, even tourists believe this approach is a recipe for disaster.
An assessment of the situation should have been done on whether the virus could be controlled or with the vaccine. If you don't have it and people can get infected, then it is a matter of safety.
The recent surge in Spain has sent alarm bells ringing through Europe as other regional countries follow UK's step of reimposing travel restrictions on the country. But Spain has called this an overreaction, saying it will negotiate with UK to exclude the Balearic Islands and the Canary Islands from the restrictions. Morocco too has reported its highest case count after months as the second wave hits the country. Australia's second most populous state of Victoria logged more deaths and a record daily increase of new cases. Premier Daniel Andrews says if people don't get themselves tested in time, the situation can get worse.
It's just a matter of fact we have too many people who have symptoms and they are going to work. And what that means, even with mask wearing, even with hand hygiene, even with distancing, that is an unacceptable risk in terms of transmitting this virus.
China recorded 61 new cases, the highest daily figure since April, due to clusters in 3 separate regions that have sparked fears of a fresh wave. Meanwhile, South Korea's new coronavirus cases have fallen back to below 30 as imported cases dwindled from a record high over the weekend.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, over 80% COVID-19 patients have recovered, with the daily deaths dropping consistently. The Health Ministry has reported 20 deaths from the coronavirus and 1,176 new cases in the past 24 hours. The death toll in the country has risen to 5,842, with over 274,000 confirmed cases, of which over 241,000 have recovered. The ministry said there are now over 27,000 active cases in the country, of which 1,229 are in critical condition. Sindh is the worst hit province with over 118,000 infections, while Punjab has reported over 92,000 cases. In the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, the tally of infected is over 33,000, while there are over 11,000 cases in Balochistan. The capital city, Islamabad, has reported close to 15,000 cases, while Azad Jammu and Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan have crossed 4,000 cases. Moving on, Beijing says the U.S. consulate in China's southwestern city of Chengdu has been formally closed. Beijing ordered the facility to be shut in retaliation for China being ousted from its consulate in Houston, Texas by Washington. In a statement, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs said the U.S. flag on the consulate has been lowered and its plaque removed. It said Chinese authorities have taken possession of the premises. Beijing says closing the consulate is a legitimate and necessary response to unreasonable measures by the United States. The Foreign Ministry also alleged some American staff at the consulate interfered in China's internal affairs and endangered its security and interests. Meanwhile, Germany has rejected a proposal by United States President Donald Trump to invite Russian President Vladimir Putin back into the G7. In an interview, Foreign Minister Heiko Maas said Moscow needs to actively solve the conflict in Crimea and eastern Ukraine first. Maas described the relationship with Russia as currently difficult in many areas. He said Moscow's unrelenting disrespect of international rules and norms is why it remains outside of the G7 and will continue to remain out. But he said Germany needs Russia to solve conflicts such as those in Syria and Libya. Trump raised the prospect of invitation last month following Russia's expulsion from the bloc in 2014 when it annexed Crimea. The ceasefire in Donbass, the region on the borderline of the eastern Ukraine, has come into effect today. On 22nd July, Ukrainian and pro-Russian separatists agreed to a complete and all-encompassing ceasefire in the conflicting Donbass region. The truce is backed by Russia's President Vladimir Putin and his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky. Germany and France mediated talks between Ukraine and Russia since a peace agreement was signed in Minsk in 2015 and have applauded this move. But some differences remain as Kremlin opposes Kiev's planned format of elections in the Donbass region, saying it is violation of the Minsk agreement. Meanwhile, Zelensky called for release of Ukrainian citizens being held in eastern Ukraine, Crimea and Russia. Moving on, in Russia's eastern city of Khabarovsk for the third weekend in a row, hundreds have gathered to demonstrate against the arrest of provincial ex-governor Sergei Furgal. The weekend's protests were reportedly the largest to have taken place over the past weeks. These included chants of freedom for Furgal, "This is our region," and "Away with Putin." Sergei Furgal is now in jail in Moscow on charges of attempted murder and ordering two contract killings of some 15 years ago. Supporters say the charges are politically motivated. Furgal, who denies the allegations, beat a pro-Kremlin candidate in an election nearly 2 years ago. In the United States, Black Lives Matter protests continue to rage across numerous cities in the United States, with dozens more being arrested overnight. Federal agents fired tear gas to disperse the crowd in Portland as the protests against racism and police brutality continued for the 60th day. In Seattle, police arrested 45 people after 21 officers got injured in clashes with the protesters. Earlier, a person was shot dead in Black Lives Matter protests in Austin, Texas, when several shots were fired at a demonstration. In a briefing, the police said they had detained a suspect. Over in Colorado, at least 2 people were injured as a vehicle barreled through the demonstrators. Protests against systemic racism and police violence have engulfed the country since the custodial murder of African-American George Floyd in May. Now moving on to Iraq, where the anti-government demonstrators continue to gather in Najaf, Nasiriyah and Karbala. The protests are demanding better public services, especially a stable supply of electricity, as temperatures soar in the country. The demonstrators burned ties to block the roads and chanted slogans against the government. This comes amid rising public anger over the government response to COVID-19 pandemic and its worsening economic fallout in the country. Now, thousands of Israelis have joined nationwide demonstrations over the weekend against the government. Demonstrators demand Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's resignation over corruption charges and his government's handling of COVID-19 pandemic. Protesters shouted slogans such as "Bibi resign," 1 million unemployed, Prime Minister, as huge crowds rallied in Tel Aviv and in other cities. Police made several arrests and deployed water cannon to dispel protesters. Israel is witnessing a surge in unemployment as figures rise to 20% with the ongoing pandemic. Demonstrators argue the financial assistance offered by the government has not been nearly enough. The number of coronavirus cases has also soared since the lockdown was lifted in May, which has also come under fire. Still in Israel, which army says one of its drones has crashed inside Lebanon during an operational activity along the border. Israel's media says the drone crashed after it experienced a technical failure. Lebanon claims Israel violated its airspace at least 29 times in the last 48 hours. In a statement, the Lebanese army said all violations are being monitored in coordination with the UN peacekeeping missions. Tensions have risen along Israel's border with Syria and Lebanon this weekend after a Hezbollah member was killed in an Israeli strike near Damascus. The Israeli military has since boosted its forces on its northern front. More news coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. Qatar's Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani and the United States military chief have discussed strategic cooperation between the two nations. In a statement, Emir's office said Al Thani hosted U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff General Mark Milley in Doha. The statement said the two sides also discussed regional development and joint efforts to enhance security and stability of the region. Qatar hosts some 13,000 U.S. troops in Al Udeid Air Base, 30 kilometers southwest of Doha. The base is used as a central command for operations against terror groups in Iraq and Syria. On Friday, General Miley paid an unannounced visit to Israel and met with senior Israeli military and intelligence officials. Now in Sudan, 60 people have been killed and another 60 injured in fresh violence in the West Darfur region of Sudan. The UN official said around 500 armed men attacked Masteri town north of Beida village. The UN said 20 others were killed earlier as they returned to their fields for the first time in years. Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok announced that Khartoum will be sending security forces to Darfur to protect its citizens. No group has claimed responsibility for the attacks so far. Now, livelihoods of millions of Pakistanis are dependent on the agriculture sector of the country, which is highly sensitive to climate change. Pakistan, being an agrarian economy, has been facing dire climate challenges for decades. More about this in this report by our correspondent Manahil Ahmed from Islamabad.
The weather variations have been a real challenge for Pakistan. Climate Change Minister Zartaj Gul said Islamabad is initiating a gigantic project called Smart Climate Agriculture to sort out water deficiencies and weather anomalies.
Smart Climate Agriculture, it's $37 million is given to Pakistan, and it's a 3 years plan actually. Basic purpose would be that it would be that those seeds or that agriculture is going to be heat resistant and it's going to be water efficient.
Accomplishing another milestone to create a direct contact with farmers regarding a spatial shift of rainfall, the Climate Ministry has developed an advanced software.
Basically, what information or what strategy or calendar Ministry of Climate Change used to had, it had to be shared or it has to route through different ministries. There will be changes that our information, this sudden rainfall, this pattern or this change will go directly to the farmer so the farmer can get information.
The minister said climate change has been a top priority of the government as they are revisiting old ways to manage climatic impacts and to focus not only on mitigation but adaptation as well. Reporting for Indus News, Manahil Ahmed, Islamabad.
Now, the death toll from floods in India's northeastern Assam state has jumped to 102. The state's Disaster Management Authority said 5 deaths were recorded in the past 24 hours. Over 2.6 million people have been affected by the deluge in Assam's 27 districts. Meanwhile, in Bangladesh, the death toll in floods has surged to 119 with 8 more fatalities. Environmental experts have warned of long-term adverse impact due to the flooding in the country. The monsoon season usually falls from June to September, causing widespread death and destruction across the region every year. Gone with the Wind star and last surviving actress of the golden age of Hollywood, Olivia de Havilland has died at the age of 104. Her publicist said the actress died of natural causes at her home in Paris, where she had lived for more than 60 years. The 2 times Academy Award-winning actress also starred opposite swashbuckling Errol Flynn in a series of films starting in the 1930s. She made a lasting impression as the bashful Southern belle Melanie in Gone with the Wind in 1939.
Well, I love making Gone with the Wind, and the mysterious thing is that we had a feeling in those days when a film lasted 1 year and then you never saw it again, that this film would last longer. We never thought it was going to last, 60 years.
China's thousands of state-owned enterprises, local governments and public institutions are expanding hiring. This comes as a record number of students graduate into a job market left reeling by the COVID-19 pandemic. Boss Xi Jinping research says around 8.7 million Chinese students are graduating this year, almost 500,000 more than last year. It said the private firms' job market for graduates has fallen 22%, which has created an active employment crisis in China. Beijing has warned graduates who generally enter the workforce in June or July may face a severe situation. President Xi Jinping has urged companies to hire more people, fearing that the struggling graduates can turn into negative energy. Asian markets have edged up as investors tread carefully amid rising COVID-19 cases and US-China friction. Stocks in Taiwan led the gains as the TAIEX soared 2.5% high. Shares of Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company jumped up nearly 10%. South Korea's Kospi also saw robust gains as it rose over 1%. Mainland Chinese stocks also gained fractionally after China's industrial profits for June soared 11.5%. Japanese stocks were mixed, with the Nikkei 225 slipping marginally, while the Topix index hovered above the flat line. Australia's ASX 200 also edged up marginally. Gold prices rocketed to a record high, with a spooked investor rushed into the safe haven as coronavirus spreads across the globe. The metal has surged more than 1% in Asian trade. Now, the West Indies are faced with an uphill task, scoring 389 to win the third test when play resumes today on the fourth day of the match. The Windies will need to really buckle down, especially after losing early wickets last night to Stuart Broad. At stumps on day 3, the visitors were 10 for 2 with Craig Braithwaite and Shai Hope unbeaten on the crease. Earlier, England declared their second innings after putting 226 runs on the scoreboard, giving the visitors a target of 399 runs. Both the openers Rory Burns and Dom Sepley, as well as skipper Joyer Butt, scored half-century. The three-match test series is evenly poised at 1-1. Now, in football, Manchester United and Chelsea have qualified for the UEFA Champions League at the expense of Leicester City. United beat Leicester 2-0 in their most important fixture of the season, while Wolves' dream of playing Europa League was demolished after losing 2-0 to Chelsea. In another match, champions Liverpool ended their historic campaign with a 3-1 win against Newcastle. Aston Villa will play Premier League football next season after a draw at West Ham was enough to ensure they escaped relegation. Leicester City's Jamie Vardy ended this season as a top scorer with 23 goals. In the main event of the UFC fight island in Abu Dhabi, former middleweight champion Robert Whittaker has claimed a decision victory over British contender Darren Till. Whittaker returned after 9 months to outpoint Darren Till over 5 rounds and put himself back into the UFC middleweight title conversation. In another fight, Alexander Gustafsson's heavyweight debut was a dismal affair as he was ousted in the first round against Fabricio Werdum. Former straightweight champion Carla Esparza defeated unbeaten Marina Rodriguez by decision. More than 100 fighters flew to Abu Dhabi's Yas Island for 4 events amid strict safety protocols. And now let's have a look at the weather updates across the globe. Well, that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News. Take care.